Because, I've hooked up things between like our Slack group to HubSpot to spreadsheets, right? And then like that allows you to figure out like, oh, okay, like if I need a unique identifier for a person in Slack, and like how do I attach that to their unique contact ID in HubSpot? And it's like, oh, it's based on email address. And then it's like, oh, now there's like 30 different fields in HubSpot for emails. There's like primary email, personal email, all these additional email addresses that you can have, right? And so like that's also a great place because that's also the foundation of like, right, if you're building any sort of integration or, going through any sort of like developer language, right, and building it that way, like you're doing all those same things. You're just doing it in a different way. So yeah, doing stuff like that very much provides you with the framework and the context to think about how someone would also build technology to solve those problems. And yeah, it kind of forces you to at least have that mindset.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Rev Amp podcast. I'm super excited today to welcome a very special guest. Matt Volm is the founder and CEO, I think, of Rev Ops Co-op, which is a fantastic community for any revenue operations professionals. I'm assuming most of the folks out there watching and listening have either heard of or are members of Rev Ops Co-op. But Matt, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and how you kind of fell into the world of RevOps.
Yeah. So yes, hello everybody. As Mark said, the community RevOps Co-op, we have about 12,000 members from all across the globe. Majority of folks do work in RevOps, but all you really need to be in the community is a passion for revenue operations, regardless of job title. And we've got 45 plus countries represented, I think. So truly a kind of a global reach. And if you want to hang out in person, we're also doing our conference, Rev Ops AF, where I'll be getting together with 300 plus folks like Mark, folks from Deal Hub, a bunch of other kind of companies, and a bunch of our community members getting together in sunny San Diego at the end of May. So that's definitely worth checking out as well. Rev Ops friends, SoCal sunshine, ocean waves, sounds pretty good if you ask me. And in terms of so that's kind of where I'm at now. But yeah, I guess quick spiel on me and my background. I think like most people, kind of fell into call it RevOps by accident a little bit. So I had we started the company in the community about 3 years ago, and before doing that, I was the VP of business operations at an early stage software company called Ally.io, which was building OKR software. And I was around the like the 10th, 11th employee at the company. And my job title was VP of BizOps, but that encompassed a whole lot of things, right? It was finance, there was some legal stuff in there, HR, and then there was RevOps. And I think at the time RevOps was just getting started. And so they decided to just kind of call it RevOps because it was easier than saying marketing ops, sales ops, and CS ops. But it was all on me. And I had absolutely zero prior experience doing any RevOps related kind of roles. And now here I was responsible for like fixing the CRM and building stuff in Salesforce and integrating all these different tools and leveraging like some contractors and stuff to help with that. So very much learning on the fly and learning on the job quickly. And then actually it was after that company that I started a RevOps software company called Funnel IQ. And as part of that, we started Rev Ops Co-op, and fast forward to today, we're no longer working on any of the software stuff because in typical startup fashion, that didn't work out. And we're fully focused on our community, Rev Ops Co-op. So that's the abbreviated version of the story.
Amazing. That's amazing. That's a really interesting nugget there about the founding of Rev Ops Co-op. It was kind of like as a offshoot of the actual product, but it was the community that kind of became the thing. That's probably a story for another episode, but it's super interesting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I love the idea of kind of being dropped in the deep end with a kind of a new kind of role where you have to kind of figure it out. That's always been kind of, we were talking before I turned the camera on about, the way my brain works is like, in order for me to be kind of stimulated and fulfilled professionally, I really have to be challenged to like solve problems. And I love that idea of just kind of figuring it out. But that obviously is a super can be a very overwhelming role. So maybe we can talk about that experience. How did you, because it was definitely a nascent position, job title then, and probably new within the company. How did you prioritize? How did you kind of goal set? You were kind of writing the playbook for building a RevOps role and kind of managing the go-to-market function, like without ensuring there are no silos. So how did you go about planning and operating?
Yeah, so I guess I was a little bit lucky in the sense that this company Ally.io, they were it was OKR software. So very much, goal setting, goal driven was part of the culture, and leveraging that framework as a way to execute it quarter by quarter was just kind of embedded in every member of the team. And my background before that role was mostly finance and kind of finance and accounting. And so that was the experience that I brought into the role. And so for me, the thing that I kind of started with, and I think, also anyone kind of either jumping into a new role or, kind of in their current positions, right? It can feel very overwhelming because you've got a whole slew of different things that you could work on, right? Whether it's different projects, different, technology deployments, like process improvements, like there's just a lot of different things that you could do. And trying to figure out what to do first, how to prioritize things can be really, really hard. So for me, I always started with what are the things that are important to, the company? What are our goals? What are the things that we're trying to achieve? And at least for us at this early stage company, mostly around, like revenue growth and kind of new customers, right? And so, and again, so the next step was like, okay, well, this might sound not basic. How do you grow revenue? So like, okay, well, you got to keep your current customers, and then you got to add new ones, and you can drive more revenue from your current customers. And it's like, okay, well, what are the specific activities or things that I can do, that I can influence to drive each of those different buckets, right? And so it's like, okay, well, we want to keep our customers. It's like, well, what are we doing on the customer success side? Are there things that we can do, say, with implementation to maybe deliver a better user experience, right? Deliver a better first impression for people when they become customers? Is there a way to cut down on the time between when a customer signs and when they, go live, or, they kind of get that, have that like value achieved date? And, same thing on the expansion side in terms of driving more revenue from current customers is like, okay, well, what is our current process today? How do we identify customers that are ripe for expansion? But also just like, well, how do you drive, what does expansion mean? Like, are you a one product? Do we only have one product to sell? So the only way to expand is to sell more seats? Or do we have multiple products where, a customer doesn't need to have more people and we can just sell them, product B, C, and D? But understanding, how you can actually drive those results in those different areas. And then, kind of last thing is just understanding like some of the effort related to those projects that can go into each of those, right? So if it's, maybe on the implementation your side, you see like, oh, we have a lengthy implementation cycle. It's kind of clunky because we're sharing all these Google Sheets and stuff like that. Maybe we should, move into more of a project management implementation tool like Asana or Notion or Rocket Lane or Baton, right? And so those can all be things that you can then work on to help influence those particular outcomes. But you need to understand also the effort and the time and the dollars, right? And prioritize things that way. So that's always very much just how my brain kind of worked, because again, coming from the finance background, understanding call it like the math, right? Behind like how things show up on a financial statement, and then the individual activities that you or your team can do to actually help influence those things, and making that connection is always where I tried to focus. And for me, it always started with kind of like that tops down approach, and then trying to align the different things that I was able to do or I was able to control with those specific outcomes.
Yeah, you were thinking about the math that, that wasn't really all that popular for a while. People were not growing based on doing the math. It was based on hype, a lot of it,
Yeah.
right? I think we've
Yeah.
seen a lot of the outcome of that. Math is cool again, I think, for
Yeah.
better or for worse.
Yeah.
Um, so, being able to have kind of a completely blank slate to work with is one thing, but coming in and having, existing processes and tools, or lack thereof, kind of in place, and maybe some inertia there. How did you decide on, rip, replace, as opposed to optimize the existing process? How, did you look for the problem, work on a process, and then if the process required a tool, go to a tool? Or did you, were you kind of, because of maybe a smaller team, were you relying more heavily on automation and tools?
Yeah. So definitely, like you said, always start with the problem, and also understand that, typically within RevOps, right, you're supporting marketing, sales, kind of post sales. So a lot of times the real problem will not be maybe the initial thing that you encounter or the thing that people come to you with, right? And so there's got to be some investigation there, right? If one of your sales reps, comes and is like, hey, I think we should get this tool because I hate putting notes into the CRM, right? I'd be like, okay, well, you can't just take that at face value, right? Do some digging, ask some questions, understand like what the real problem is there. Is it because it is actually hard to get things into the CRM? Is it because this person's not taking notes in the first place? And or maybe they don't know what to do or where to go or how to do it the right way. So, truly understanding what the problem is always step number one. And then for me, step number two is always, what can you do like now, today, this afternoon, in the next hour to spin up a V1 solution of that problem. And that's going to mean it's manual. It might involve clicking buttons. It's going to involve using existing tools, spreadsheets, things that you already have. But what's the manual way that you would solve that problem today, given the current environment and the tools and the systems and processes that you have? And then once you solve for it that way, then the third step is going to more automation technology, right? Like, is there a technological way to automate this more or to improve this? And I am a big believer in, especially these days, like just trying to consolidate like tech stack, like avoid buying point solutions or technology just to solve a very specific thing. Just because, again, it's like anything. The more intersections you add, right? Whether it's like tools, whether it's people, screens, like just the more complexity you add as well. And so, the trade-off there is typically not worth it in terms of like the value you get from a point solution solving a very specific problem compared to the new problems that you've created with adding another tool to your tech stack, additional data points that are now going to start flowing everywhere and can begin confusing people, the training, all that stuff that's associated with it. So that's why it's always kind of number three in my bucket in terms of like identify the problem, spin up a very quick manual solution, then look at how you can automate and use technology from there.
It's so funny. We've kind of like come full circle, because the conversation, I don't think was really being had for so long. It was really just taken as it's a point of faith. that, you know, everybody kind of gets their pick of the litter in terms of their point solutions, and we'll just kind of figure it out. No one ever really, I mean, I'm sure they asked, but it really was that question wasn't really given much weight as to what are the, you know, what are the downsides here, right? You know, every point of friction or complexity you add is another potential point of failure.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you have so many potential points of failure, when something fails, actually identifying the point of failure and kind of reverse engineering, you know, what's causing it is even more complicated. And so I think that the SaaS startup world kind of thrived on a market where, you know, those point solutions were in vogue. And then, you know, that switched pretty quickly.
Yeah, and it, it makes it hard too for if you are a startup or someone starting a company these days, right? It's very especially in the revenue technology space, whether it's marketing or sales or post sales, right? You've got to be solving a real problem to be able to make it. But it's also really hard because, right, when you're creating something new or typically something from scratch, the more narrow you can get, the more success you can have, and that's kind of how you drive your wedge, right? So yeah, it's hard. It's probably the same conversation we should have been having, right? But just one of those things that people doesn't necessarily care about. But yeah, again, like if you're thinking about things end to end, right? Like that's again kind of the job of RevOps, right? Like those are all the things that you should be thinking about, is not just like how this tool might solve the problems that you have today, but like, okay, so now I deploy this, like what new problems am I going to have that I'll also need to solve, and just make sure you look at that stuff collectively.
Yeah, for sure. Um, you know, thinking about just the whole kind of, I'm visualizing it in my head as like an end to end, right? Of, you know, marketing, sales, customer success, and, you know, then, you know, accounting, finance, whatever, the whole thing. Um, you know, part of the idea of having someone in RevOps was to make sure that those roles, that those positions are not living in isolation from each other, that they're aligned. You know, there's often now a chief revenue officer role that is kind of the roll up. But from a RevOps perspective and kind of building out the support and operationally for that, you know, those roles, you know, solution agnostic, or, you know, whether or not it's a tool that you need to do it or not, what are the like things that you need to empower these people with? What are kind of table stakes that these people need to be able to do, that is, you know, on RevOps to solve for, whether that's to get a tool, build something internally, use existing tools to make it work. You know, what's the like, you know, what's the just like baseline requirement, and then maybe what's the like, like the Ford and then like Ferrari.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I mean, at least, if you think about, uh, if you think about the different teams and, kind of how things flow through, right, on the marketing side, uh, marketing automation tool of some sort, and then a data provider, as well, are, kind of like table stakes, things that everyone's going to need to do their job successfully and well. And when you look at sales, right, obviously the CRM also going to need some sort of like sales engagement technology, which maybe might be something you can get in your CRM, right? Like HubSpot has, some prospecting and like sequence building and automation stuff in there. But also, there's obviously like incumbents out there like outreaches and sales lofts and like other tools that do things on the sales side. So, CRM, automation to support outbound efforts, things like that. Some sort of salespeople always need some sort of like, sales enablement support as well. I think tools and technology in that space, like once your sales team grows and things get bigger, like you can start looking at that. But I don't think that's anything you necessarily need up front or from the get-go. And then on the post-sales side, I think the one thing actually that I've heard from a lot of people in RevOps is they always wish they would have invested in some sort of customer success platform sooner than they did.
Interesting.
So yeah, and so I think like, again, whether it's like main ones that everyone talks about, right? Gainsight, Catalyst, there's others out there like Vitally and some tools like that. But that is one of the things that again, because post sales kind of always gets forgotten a little bit. And I think, yeah, a lot of people just say they wish they would have invested in some sort of tool sooner. And then, again, especially I guess going back to the sales side, there's always the connection between all the stuff that happens between like I'll call it like quotes or proposals getting sent out, and then when the deal actually gets signed and making sure that those things get billed and invoiced correctly. So I think early days of companies, a lot of those things, again, doing the like identify the problem, fixing it manually, you can get away with like some Google Doc templates and, a DocuSign and, some other, and then like manually create the invoice in Stripe. But, eventually, right, like that gets unwieldy very quick. And so you do need some sort of like CPQ solution in there to help with
Yeah,
that.
and I've been on the receiving end of phone calls of when somebody, when it got unwieldy quickly without them, the company grew much faster than they were able to kind of solve with Google Sheets and Google Docs.
Yeah.
And, then they're like, it becomes much bigger of a problem. I've always found that Google Docs is like an enabler for all sorts of, risky and bad ideas that you think you can do yourself. I myself have
Yeah.
quite a few crazy automations hooking into Google Sheets that are, mostly MVPs right now. But I
Yeah.
think this idea of RevOps start, kind of taking on some of the role that maybe a developer might have taken with APIs and things like that. What level of developer skills, experience do you think someone in RevOps either needs to have or should have?
Yeah. So it's like it's one of those things I feel like, I've seen people on um, you know, LinkedIn and some other platforms be like, oh, if you're in RevOps, you need to know Python and like SQL and all this other stuff. And I like if you do, great. Like, yes, that will most certainly help you. Is it a requirement? Like, no, I don't think so. Because it will like having those skills like anything else, right? Like the broader your skill set, like the more things you have in your toolbox, right? But is that a requirement to be successful in the role? No. And I think especially where technology is at today and where it's heading, right? With again, like, here I am like talking about AI and in the podcast is like just think about how like I don't at this time last year, I don't think anyone was talking about OpenAI or ChatGPT or anything yet, right? Like, or when that came on the
Um,
scene, like,
yeah, it came out in Thanksgiving of last, like not like
okay,
November
so
2022. So towards the end of the year of 2022, but it
okay,
was still
so
pretty
yeah,
niche.
yeah. So think about a year and a half ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, no one was like that was not a thing. So just look at all the things now that people are doing with that, all the companies that have just spun up in that space, and the fact that it is literally seems to be the only thing that people can talk about. But like, you don't need to understand any like coding developer any developing skills to be able to leverage a tool like that to do your job. And again, even before that, there's this big push towards no code tools and enable like putting the power into the hands of like non-developers, right? People that may not have that skill set or solution, but they're well-rounded in other areas. And that was actually like that was kind of my background, right? I mentioned like finance and accounting. I have zero developer skills. I do not know how to do Python or SQL or any of that stuff. But you throw me into like you tell me that I'm now responsible for RevOps and I've got to jump into Salesforce and like build out some some flows and like, some different properties and fields and build an integration with outreach. Like, I'm like, okay, like I'll give that a shot. Like, no idea how to do that. Never did it before, but like, here we go. And, you figure it out. So I don't think that those are like necessary, helpful. Yes, 100%. But like everything else, right? And when it comes to leveling up your skills, there's a whole slew of different things that you can do. One of them might be learning new skills like that. Like I said, going out and learning SQL. Also, that can be hard, take a lot of time, and there's other things you could do with that time. So, weigh all of the options that you have, and yeah, level up in the areas that you think are best. For me, a lot of like learning on the job and diving into those new projects and like learning by doing. That's the best way that my brain works and how I typically will learn new things versus just like sitting down and say taking a course on SQL or something.
Yeah.
But that's not the way that other people's brains works, right? And so do what's best for you, but also understand that you've got a whole slew of alternatives out there, and it's not a one over the other sort of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. I'm hearing myself talk because that is exactly how I am as well. I can't do a course. Like learning the normal way never worked for me. I've always learned by doing, and usually just doing every wrong way until I find the right way.
Yeah.
And often that will end up being longer and more strenuous, but it's just the way I learn. But one of the promises I think of AI that's actually come true in a lot of ways, more so than a lot of the other kind of hype, has been this ability to democratize certain aspects of knowledge, especially in this way, because RevOps was never really expected to be a developer, but there are some people say it's kind of like developer adjacent. You need to kind of have
Yeah.
context and understand. But now you can come in and you're like, I don't know Python. I couldn't start from scratch, but I kind of understand, the overall kind of what it looks like. Then you can interact with ChatGPT or Copilot and GitHub or whatever. And, you're probably not going to get the right answer the first time, but back and forth a little bit, you will. And, if you have no context and no experience with any of these development languages and you don't really understand them at all, it probably won't work. But if you have a little bit of understanding of the way to talk about it, how to ask the question, it's huge. It's a life changer. But you don't need to ask someone in your team, hey, I need you to write a SQL query because I don't know how to do it. You could just say that to ChatGPT and it'll give you a query. It'll be wrong. You'll feed it the error. It'll tell you, okay, try this, and then you'll be able to do it. And it's, I really do think it's offered so much value to people in this kind of role. In the RevOps world and RevOps adjacent and really any role.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And even if you, even I was even thinking of tools like like Zapier that are out there, for example,
yeah,
like that can always be a great, especially if you're talking about pushing data between tools or systems and understanding like and building out like workflows to accomplish things like that. That's actually another great place for like a V1 of a, call it like your product, right? Because, I've hooked up things between like our Slack group to HubSpot to spreadsheets, right? And then like that allows you to figure out like, oh, okay, like if I need a unique identifier for a person in Slack, and like how do I attach that to their unique contact ID in HubSpot? And it's like, oh, it's based on email address. And then it's like, oh, now there's like 30 different fields in HubSpot for emails. There's like primary email, personal email, all these additional email addresses that you can have, right? And so like that's also a great place because that's also the foundation of like, right, if you're building any sort of integration or, going through any sort of like developer language, right, and building it that way, like you're doing all those same things. You're just doing it in a different way. So yeah, doing stuff like that very much provides you with the framework and the context to think about how someone would also build technology to solve those problems. And yeah, it kind of forces you to at least have that mindset.
yeah. And I think my hot take for 2024 is that before AI was the thing everyone talked about, it was the no code revolution. It was like no code, no code. And then AI kind of came along, and that's the only thing people say. I think no code's going to come back in terms of people kind of rediscovering its importance. I love it. So we've used Zapier. I actually got the team to start using kind of a self-hosted open source a tool called N8N, which is similar, but requires, I think, a little bit more coding knowledge. And so it's been super good for like training my brain, but also to think that way, to think like a builder, to think of flows and how data works. And it's the same thing. I get a Slack message and someone like real quick, I need to figure out how to update this field by doing this. I'm like, okay, give me an hour, I'll figure it out. And I think that's going to become more and more valuable as companies are, downsizing and kind of cutting budgets and being able to have that skill, that ability to kind of make it work with what's available by using, I think building the internal functionality that's needed to make an organization run is going to be more and more valuable. And I think some of those tools like Zapier clearly is making a run for getting more users. They changed their pricing structure because for me, it was also, there was a certain thing, the task limit was getting onerous in terms of the costs. They clearly understood that and are trying to grab market share. Time flies. We're actually kind of running down on time here. So Matt, I really appreciate your time today. This is super awesome to be able to talk to you within this context. Before we, close up for the day, why don't you tell the folks at home how they can find you? I think I know the answer. And maybe where they could maybe consume some content you write or anything like that.
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn. If you want to chat, send me a connection request. I'm in the Rev Ops Co-op Slack group as well. So you can join our community at revopscoop.com. We have a free membership option and a paid membership option available for you. The website, revopscoop.com, is also where we've got our blog, we've got recordings of all the digital events and write-ups that we've ever done. We've got a RevOps Demos That Don't Suck series if you're interested in different RevOps software solutions and stuff that are out there. So lots of different content available on the website. And then revopsaf.com is where you can learn more about our conference. And yes, the AF does stand for what you think it stands for.
Abercrombie and Fitch.
Yeah, annual festival. But yeah, so check that out. Early bird tickets are kind of out there still on sale, and we'd love to see you all in May in San Diego. And yeah, that's where y'all can find me and connect.
All right, Matt, thank you.